George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about, the positive achievements of African Americans from all walks of life. So glad that you could be a part of our conversation today, and we have a good one for you today. We're going to talk about healthy masculinity and healthy manhood with two brothers who are making an impact in the community. But first, let me give a big shout out to the Community Folk Arts Center, who is hosting our conversation tonight. They're also recipients of the Black Equity and Excellence Grant, just like I am. And this is an example of equity and excellence in action. Also, big shout out to Dr. Tanisha Jackson and her efforts here at the gallery. The gallery is opening. They got a great exhibit here, so we invite you to check it out. Something about biodegradable clothes or something like that. Anyway, it's a great show here among the different things that they have to offer here, and we're really excited about that. We're talking about this conversation is happening in cooperation with Vera House, where I also work, to really look at the opportunities that we have to talk about the Vera House 12-Man model, which is an opportunity for us to rethink masculinity and manhood and engage men in meaningful conversation about the role that they can play in preventing gender-based violence. So let me introduce my panel. We have two men who have gone through the 12-Man model at Vera House. Hasan Stephens is the Chief Executive Officer of the Good Life Foundation. He'll tell us what the Good Life Foundation is all about in just a minute. Also joining me is Vincent Love. Vincent Love is the past president of the 100 Black Men of Syracuse. The 100 Black Men have partnered with Vera House in the past. He'll say a little bit more about that partnership and his many conversations that he's had as part of the 12-Man model. I'll say something about Hasan Stephens. Let me begin with Hasan. Hasan actually called me, and it's truth-telling time. Hasan said, "Yo, George," I mean, this is how we talk. He was like, well, actually, Maestro. He says, "Yo, George, listen, I'm ready to do some work on myself. I'm ready to change. I've got some stuff. I want to be better. And so I'm going to do the 12-Man model." And I'm telling that story because it's a true story, and I'm not telling a tale out of school, because this actually happened. And we had a long conversation in Facebook Messenger. I was like, let's go. Hasan, this is what I need you to do. I need you to get a crew together, and we're gonna make this happen. So we did that, and then actually after we did that, he came back for more and got another group together. But here's what's fascinating. This is what I tell people, that when you're involved in this 12-Man model conversation through Vera House, through the White Ribbon Campaign as well, every conversation you have with a different group, it touches different parts of you. It's not one and done. Like you're in that room and some things happen. Hasan had two different meetings, two different groups of people, and then we heard different things happen. Same thing I could say about Vincent Love, who's gone through it 10, 11 times, maybe. Every session, I noticed Vince peeling back another layer. So I got to tell you, and look, I'm also a part of it. It's a community. It's also part of community. So I'm going to invite these gentlemen. We've got some areas that we want to get to. We're going to particularly talk about the way they navigate manhood, masculinity as a Black man, even during these times. Let's not pretend that it's not been difficult for Black men and their sons and mothers and their sons in this community and in this country. So we'll touch on some of that as well. But first, Hasan Stephens, with that introduction, talk to me about your experience of the 12-Man model through Vera House and what your takeaways are from that experience.
The experience was good. It was an opportunity to, like you said, the takeaway was that it really depends on the perspectives and the mentality of the men in the room at the time. We had two completely different experiences. The first was more described as apprehensive. Mm-hmm. Men were more apprehensive about accepting the notions and perspectives that were being shared through the 12-Man model. And then the second had a totally different makeup, and they really embraced it. And I felt like we got a little bit farther, but at the same time, even in the first session, we questioned and talked about enough to make people walk away thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think the impact of the experience itself is only as effective as the stage in which the man is in their own personal development, right? You mentioned the fact that I called you. I was ready personally,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those other men had to be ready personally. You have to be open to the ideas to be able to fully get what you need to get out of the 12-man model.
What have you taken from that experience of you going through that and questioning? Because when you think about it, the experience is, it's conversation based, and we're not dictating to you how you should think or believe, but we're questioning how you think and believe. What do you take away? What's it meant for you to have walked through that journey?
I think it raised some questions that we as men need to ask ourselves, right? And so, it really is a matter of you can question yourself, but if you don't know the questions to ask,
Mm-hmm.
then you're still in the same position and place that you're in, right? So having a conversation around consent and really fully understanding what consent is, I think gives different perspective about how to engage and deal with the opposite sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think even some of the information, so there's a standard, there is a industry standard, I would say, of what consent is, of certain terminology, of certain understandings, and you may not agree with everything. I did, but you may not agree with everything as a man, but at least you now are informed with
Right.
the terminology. You are now informed with the perspectives, and you have something to gauge your own perspective, mentality, and behavior against, and that's important.
Informed, right? You to know better is to do better. What questions do you think we need to ask ourselves?
Cool. What questions as men?
Well, you said we need to ask ourselves some questions. So I'm thinking, what are the questions do you think we need to ask ourselves?
Well, I think with any, when you think about any system of oppression, right, whether it's racism or anything else, if you are part of the dominant group, right, the group that experiences privilege, it is imperative that you ask yourself how you can use your privilege to undo and break down that system of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that it's important for you to continuously do that internal reflection, that self-assessment, to understand how you might even unknowingly be contributing to that oppression in your experience of privilege. Like, what is the privilege that I experience? What is the privilege that I display? And if I display that, how can I then change that in order to make sure that I am being a true ally, right? What does it mean to be an ally?
We'll talk about that privilege because certainly when you think of your status as an African-American male in the society, the idea of privilege doesn't always come in, but we'll talk about that. Hold that for a minute, because I want to get Vincent Love in here. Vince, the 12-man model, who's done it about 12 times. Talk to me, Vince, about your work and why you are so committed.
Yeah, well, George, first of all, when we started with 100 Black men, our mission was to improve the quality of life in the greater Syracuse community, through education, service, and role models. And that role model piece is what was most important, because we were committed to working with young men and young ladies, and providing a role model for them to develop into healthy adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so in doing that, it was necessary, as Hasan's talking about, that we first took a look at ourselves. Mm-hmm. To make sure that that image that we're projecting to these young people who have allowed us into their lives, that image was a positive image. And so my first experience with the 12-man model group, it was an eye-opener for me as an individual, because I can remember the apprehension when I walked into this room, with all these other men. And like many men, when we get together as a group, it's like that level of testosterone goes up that much higher. And we stick our chests out a little bit more, and we stand a little bit taller, because we want to be able to measure up to other men. And so in that process, my first thought was, is this going to be a safe environment for me to really get honest with who I was as a man? And what I remember walking away from that first 12-man model group with was the fact that it was okay for me to take off that mask of masculinity that I had always walked around with those, those same stereotypes of what a man was supposed to be about, how a man was supposed to act, how a man was supposed to think. And so after being able to take that mask down and have that experience to talk openly and honestly with other men around me and not feel ashamed, not be embarrassed, but feel reinforced and energized, I said, this is great. I got to do this again. You know, and so as opportunities came up for me to put together other groups of men to have these discussions and these conversations, it just kind of like snowballed. And each conversation was different. With every different group of men, there's a different conversation, and there's something different that I walked away from each one of those groups with.
Yeah, and I would say to you, Vince, that it's all part of community. Like you were in different settings and it's different community settings. And so in that community, you were engaging with different people and there's a different energy. But I observed you revealing different parts of yourself in different settings, right?
Mm-hmm.
You kept peeling back and peeling back. I was like, whoa, okay. So when you say wearing the mask, right? How do we get comfortable with taking the mask off? And what were you masking? Let me ask you that.
Well, when I say wearing your mask, it's about, oftentimes, because of our egos, because of the environments that we grow up in, because of the environments that we live in, we have a tendency, particularly as men, to put on a certain image simply for survival purposes. Okay. Growing up in inner city and housing projects, and for me, and I was always a small guy. I was never a man in large with physical stature. So I always had to put on an image that I was tough.
Right.
That I was somebody that, hey, even though he's little, he's tough. Don't mess with him. And starting at a young age doing that just stuck with me. And so whenever I found myself in an environment with other men who usually were much bigger than me physically, I always seemed to put on a image, or wanted to project an image of being tough or being a real man, so to speak, even not knowing at that time what a real man was supposed to be. The definitions and stereotypes that I grew up with, I began to find out were not really who I was and not who I wanted to be.
So do you think you have, and I ask both of you, do you think you have permission now to be authentically who you are without concern about the mask? And I ask you that as well, Hasan, because you're in the business where the mask is strong. You're in hip hop. You teach hip hop. The Good Life Foundation teaches hip hop through entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship through hip hop. And so talk to me about that, and then also tell us what the Good Life Foundation does.
So the Good Life Foundation is a connect organization. We work with the most vulnerable population of youth in the city of Syracuse. And we utilize hip hop culture and youth culture to, as a vehicle for understanding and teaching entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And obviously the population we're working with, we're trying to reduce recidivism, poverty, all of the things that they have to come across with based on their social status. And
risk factors, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of those risk factors are also contributing factors to the mask that you're talking about, right? If we're understanding, his history and context to, where a lot of the youth that we engage are dealing with it, like why. Vince talked about this persona that has to be put on because of safety reasons, for survival. And a lot of them are in forced lived environments that require that you be tough or you get eaten. Or that you fall prey, right, as a victim to the environment. And so we see that often. In fact, a lot of the posturing that we see, the violence that we see, I think is a byproduct of that persona that makes you feel like you have to do this in order to be a man, right? And you're constantly questioning whether or not you're a man. But you asked about whether or not I personally am finally in a place to be genuine, right? I actually grabbed that on, I grabbed onto that early on. Like I've always been able to be different, be me. I really have never been a follower, right? So, I've also been very spiritual. So, I think that I have been socialized. I think we are all, as men, are socialized by society to think a certain way, to act a certain way, to treat women a certain way. But if you are a self-reflective person, as a Sagittarius, I'm very self-reflective, you start to say, is this really, helpful, harmful? Like what, what does this behavior do? And in that vein, early on, I started questioning and shifting my thought pattern. But again, it's back to the informed part. It's information. The more information, the more ability you have to question yourself and to shift.
When you look back, have you caused harm?
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's impossible for any man to say that they have not caused harm.
Mm-hmm. Vince, what about you? Do you feel you're more
Absolutely.
authentic now because you're more seasoned, right? So they often say it's harder for you when you're more seasoned to change. You feel like you can be more authentic now, or what?
Absolutely. I've gotten to a point in my life now where I certainly am comfortable in my own skin, as I say, but it took me a while.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. I wish I understood now at an earlier age, where I'm at, because, and I don't know what it was. Like I said, I had been conditioned for so long, like sometimes you can get into a habit of living a certain way, of thinking a certain way, and before you know it, that becomes who you are. And sometimes it takes an experience or like the 12-man model or something to sit that mirror in front of you and say, wait a minute, I'm projecting this image, but this is not who I really am. And so as I found out little by little, what I was more comfortable with in terms of how I thought, how I interacted with people, how I felt about myself, that became a more comfortable, more relaxing position for me to be in, to begin to exist in.
Do you look back and think of times that you may have caused harm as well?
Oh, absolutely. I know I've caused harm, and that's why I think now I've embraced the place that I'm in right now about healthy masculinity, whereas service is a big part of how I want to live my life, how I want to give back to people, and be a help to individuals, because some of the harm that I cause, I can't go back and undo.
Yeah, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add. So harm, I mean, when you're shifting, right? When you're talking about causing harm, you can't change overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, right? And I would say the pivotal moment in my life, and the reason why I started to get it, there's two reasons why I started to get it early on. Not being a follower and being a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you're a better man in relation to women, right? What it does mean is that you may be ready to not worry about the impact of changing in front of others and being yourself and whatever else. But for me, being raised by a single mother gave me a level of respect for women that I think contributed to my desire to change, but it still didn't change me because society taught me that my masculinity was rooted in how many women I engaged in all of those different things, right? I think the pivotal moment for me was when I had my daughter. And so I had my daughter at a very early age. I had her at the age of 20, right? So when a man has a daughter, you frame things differently.
Well, at least you should.
At least you should. You're right. And there's many that probably don't.
Right,
And
exactly.
So we have to make room for that. But for me, that pivotal moment was like, if my daughter was with somebody, how would I want?
Right.
And the point is, what I'm making is that I did not immediately change then. I continued to make mistakes that caused harm to her in terms of seeing, that caused harm to the women around, that, it was a process. Nothing is overnight. So it doesn't happen,
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think just to add context to that, a lot of times the harm that we've caused, we don't even realize that we did, right? That's part of what is called rape culture. And I use that term not to say that any of you have done that, but I'm just saying it's the context of what we're living in, because we don't realize that we potentially have caused harm. George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation. We're with Hasan Stephens and Vincent Love. We're talking about healthy masculinity and healthy manhood. This is part of a conversation that we're doing in cooperation with Vera House and the White Ribbon Committee, the Color of Change Committee with Dr. Imad Rahim and Marissa Saunders as the honorary co-chairs. of the White Ribbon Campaign 2021, which ended in March, but this conversation in this space we weren't able to have. And let me just say a couple of things. So you see us kind of close together, and we don't have our masks on, but we have, and Hasan coughed too. So, but we're okay. Let me say it that way, right? We've taken all of the necessary COVID protocols, and we're okay. So just in case, y'all are wondering and going to send us texts and comments when you see this, COVID protocols have been established and maintained. Right, brothers?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
For those who are seeing this, for those who are hearing this, it's just whatever. Okay. Let me do this. Let me ask you about being, whether or not, and I'll start with you, Vince, this time. What are the unique cultural pressures that Black men face in our society? What are the unique cultural pressures of that Black men face in our societies?
Oh,
And so you can give me, I'll give you the broad one, and then you make it personal. And what do you face?
Mhm. Well, those pressures, you got to go way back into history.
Come on.
It starts with the breakdown of the Black families from the time that, we were brought over to this country in slavery and separated, and the roles that were established for us, not only, as Black men, but for Black women as well. And there has always been kind of a, I don't know what the right word is for it, maybe fear of Black males. And so I just think back, I think back to Old Testament biblical times, and when you had these different factions that were warring with each other, one of the primary uses or strategies that one group would use whenever it wanted to attack another group was to go into a village and kill off the men. Because once you got the men out the way, then it was easy for them to just take control of that group. And that seems to have been the pattern that this country has, the way it has operated with the Black family. It's to target the men first. And so it's been, being a Black male in this country it's been a constant struggle, okay? And so much so that we have felt, many Black men have felt like, what's the use? Others have felt like, less than a man because they haven't been able to fulfill a role that they felt like they should be fulfilling in raising a family, or just being a man in general, or being in relationships and things like that. And so the struggle is real, and it continues.
So what then are cultural pressures you face as a Black man in our society?
The cultural pressures that I face personally is that, knowing that I'm a Black man, regardless of what level of success I may accomplish in my life, I have to always keep in the back of my mind that I'm still a Black man. And so when I encounter, or when I find myself in different environments, or when I'm interacting with different people, culturally, I have to understand that, okay, I am a Black man. I might need to speak a certain way in this environment, or I might need to carry myself a certain way in this environment in order to be successful in that particular interaction at that time. And that's pressure. I know I can't just be myself everywhere I go. Okay, even in the neighborhood I live in right now, it's not a Black neighborhood. And I know that if I decide, I want to just take a walk through the neighborhood to get some fresh air for exercise, I got to consider the time of the day. How light is it out there? Oftentimes I take my wife with me because, Black woman is less threatening. And it's just, those extra gyrations that I have to go through to do even the most simplest things. I was working in the area outside of Syracuse, and I'm not going to name the area where it was, but it wasn't a predominantly Black area. As a matter of fact, there were I'll just say this, there were a lot of pro-Trump signs in this area as I was working. And so if I'm driving through and I wanted to stop and get gas, or I wanted to stop in a restaurant to get something to eat, I didn't. I just had to be selective about where I carried myself while I was in this environment. So that's the type of personal pressure that I still feel and recognize today.
Hasan, same question. Are there any unique cultural pressures that Black men face in our society, or what are the unique cultural pressures that Black men face? First part. Second part, what are the unique cultural pressures you face as a Black man in our society? And it's interesting, Vince, you talked about it from an external standpoint. So I'm wondering if either of you feel also the internal pressure culturally. So.
I think similar to what Vince said, there are external pressures or struggles that exist dating back to the time of slavery, right? And so when you think about the fact that because of the practices, many of the Black male identity was rooted in breeding, right? So we start to think about like, okay, where did we get this idea that our masculinity is rooted in how many women we are with, right? That's a notch, like, the strong Black male that can, pull the female or whatever. I think there's parts of that. I also think there's, the toxic masculinity and misogyny of dominant white society in general, period, that we have in many ways modeled after, right? So let us not make it a myth that it started with us, right? That's not, much of the behavior that we see existed, and we modeled, and that's not to say that didn't happen in Africa and different places, and that's not to say that, but I'm just speaking specifically to the African-American experience. I think that, we are constantly as Black males trying to negotiate our understanding of power and masculinity and identity. When you don't have, if you think about toxic masculinity as like, being hyper violent, right? Hyper physical, but also the misogyny that happens in engaging with women, there's also an angle of a loss of economic, social, and political power. And when you don't have economic, social, and political power, what do you have? You have the ability to kind of navigate and negotiate with what you can control, which is your body. And so that posturing of like, I am a man is oftentimes, remnants of what we saw during slavery, where slaves were pitted against each other and they had to fight. And, all of these different things that I believe became patterns, trends, and, characteristics of, masculine persona and personality, I think have been carried over and compounded and multiplied into what we see today. If you're talking on a personal level, the challenges that
cultural pressure that you experience as a Black man in our society. The
cultural pressures that I experience, being seen as equal, as enough. In the arena, I've worked very hard to get to where I am at. I'll tell you one thing that I often hear is, you're doing a lot. I know you're doing a lot, and and I'm just like, okay, I think that there are some biases and assumptions that are constantly made about African-American males, that we are not enough, we are inept, we have tons of shortcomings, and when you look at people across the board, everyone has shortcomings, right? We don't talk to the millionaire who has multiple avenues and streams of revenue and businesses and companies and say, hey, you're doing a lot. Right? But as a Black male CEO, it's often, well, you're doing a lot. Yeah, thank you. You understand what I'm saying? And so that's one of the things that I often struggle with internally, is being seen as equals with my counterparts in the arena that I'm in now. Right? I don't think personally I'm not still struggling. I'm married now. I have a daughter. I'm not struggling with that arena. I'm constantly on a daily basis trying to figure out how can I be an ally and how can I be a better man. But there are other aspects of manhood and masculinity that I still have to kind of negotiate. And it's like.
But it's interesting that both of you talked about this cultural pressure as an external, and neither of you spoke about it in terms of the pressure that you face within community to perform, whether it's masculinity or just to be accepted. Because, and where am I going with this? Like, so you both, you talked about where you live, Vince, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some might say, well, you've sold out because you live wherever you live, as if you couldn't live somewhere. So is there a piece of internalized oppression, if you will, that either of you have to navigate or negotiate?
Well, I think the answer to that question, for me, it goes back to the previous question about being comfortable in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
See, I no longer aspire to live up to the expectations of others,
Right.
in or outside
Whoever
of my
they are,
culture.
right,
Yeah,
right, in or out,
You know what I
okay.
mean?
Mhm.
I don't, the success I might have, where I live or the type of work that I do, I worked hard to get to that point in time, and I don't hold that up as a badge of, in your face type of thing where I'm trying to make you look bad.
Mhm.
If anything else, I'm like, hey, I was able to do this. Let me work. I'm willing to help you in whatever, goals or, you may have to have success in your life as well. So I don't measure myself up against what other people think about me anymore today, So that's why I guess that internal pressure for me, culturally or otherwise, is minimal.
Hasan?
I think that some of my insecurities come as byproducts of my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we can't separate as Black men the struggles that we have internally from the experiences that we've had. Now, we know that there's a long history of disconnect from education. We know that there's a long history of disconnect from experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I always struggle with is if I'm ever in a room and I'm hearing things that I haven't learned,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think about and then I imagine, okay, if it's like that for me, I think about all the youth that we serve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that disconnect of being, being in a situation where you don't know, you don't have the pathway, you don't have the strategy. And it's like, there are often times where I find myself leaving meetings and I'll go straight to Barnes and Nobles.
Mm-hmm.
I will go straight to Barnes and Nobles and I will buy a book on it right then and there. And I will read that book in 2 days. And then, okay, I have some of that knowledge and I'll continue to learn. But I recognize that my history and the disparities have caused a deficiency in some areas that I have to constantly try to make sure that I'm on point with.
So how do family values, social norms, and religion contribute to these expectations for you as Black men? Hasan, I'll start with you.
I think that being close, you talk about religion, being close to God and having a spiritual understanding of a higher power, I think is important in wanting to be better as a person, right? Because if you know that you are fundamentally doing something wrong, it's very difficult to continue to do that wrongdoing without thinking that, hey, it will come back to you. Whether you believe in karma, whether you believe in a higher power, it doesn't matter. Some sense of spirituality will want to align you with what is right. And so that constant search for what is right, it oftentimes comes to those who are, seeking that wisdom, right? And you mentioned not just religion, but what were the other
social norms, family values?
I don't care about social norms. I very much like Vince, like I'm not here to please or I don't really think about that per se.
But there are social norms that contribute to an environment that contributes to violence against women, right? So there are those pressures.
There are, but I don't know if personally I feel it's like, I think I've gotten to the point where those social norms, I have questioned them. I've questioned them enough that it's like, nah, okay, I can separate myself from social norms. At the end of the day, most social norms are not really that great. You know what I mean? Like if you think about it, they're not really that great. And so if you grow up questioning society and you're questioning, you have to know what to question, what not to question. But if you grow up questioning society, at least questioning, you may resolve that, no, yeah, that is a good norm, right? But you have to at least question it. And I've been questioning society since I was, as a black man, you question society in general because it's so you're counterculture. Hip hop is counterculture, right? So we start questioning at an early age. So I don't think that necessarily has a huge impact. Family wise though, I think the expectation of what should happen in a family, how do you have a healthy family? How do you contribute to the family? You know, are you a supporter or a provider? I do, as a man, I think about that. Like as a man, I feel like I have to provide, and that technically is a social norm. So I don't know necessarily how to answer that. I would say I think I worry more about God and family than I do what society thinks.
Vince, anything to add there?
Yeah, and I would just I would say exactly as Hasan, the way you started out when you talked about spirituality. For me, that's where it all begins, because it wasn't until I began to grow spiritually that I felt that I was kind of more centered in my life. You have to have something that centers you, that everything else in your life can revolve around. When you talk about social norms, I use spirituality to guide me in that way. And I can't quote Bible verse or anything like that, but I know that spiritually, my teachings, it said something about narrow is the gate, you know, to go the positive direction, and wide is the gate that everybody else runs through because it's the easiest path. So if I see myself leaning towards something because everybody else is doing it, that's something I need to take another look at. You know, there's something wrong with that. But as far as family values with me, I think my spiritual values help me to embrace the roles that God has placed me in my life, beginning with, you know, being a son, being a brother, being a father, being a husband, being a grandfather. I've learned to embrace those roles with a sense of honor, where I wanted to be the best son that I could be, or the best brother I could be, or you know, whatever role I was placed in at that time. And not just because I was a man and I'm supposed to, but because this is something that I want to do because it's the right thing to do.
So one of the social norms is, is that, for example, around masculinity is, I'm the man, my word is final. Father knows best, right? All of that, right? So if you believe that, what kinds of challenges and pressures does that have on a marital relationship? Y'all laughing, let me hear it.
I got married late in life.
Yes, sir.
Very late in life.
Yes, you did.
Okay. and George, you know, if we get honest, George has gotten a number of phone calls
yes, he has.
Conversations when I walked in your office and said, George, I don't understand this. Help me.
We had some conversation, but
help me to understand.
And let me just add the beauty, and just a quick aside, we need more opportunities for brothers to be able to do that. I'm on the ledge, bruh. Let me run some things by you.
Yeah, and that was part of the change in me, in that, because in that phase of my life that I went into and being a husband, I had to admit, I don't know nothing about this role. I went into it because I felt spiritually, and that center within me was saying, you know, this is what you need to do. You become stagnant in life. You know, God was leading me in another direction. So I said, okay, I'm going to trust in this unction that I have, and plus I love my wife, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this.
But it meant letting go of some beliefs that you had.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. A lot of them. Because listen, having been single all of my life, and having had, in that life, being able to make my own decisions when I want, where I want, who I want. I could not go into this marriage with that mindset. I knew it wasn't going to work because it wasn't about just me. But it was a struggle. And that's why I picked up the phone, or I called you. I knew enough to ask somebody else for help. Yeah. And I think that was growth for me, recognizing that, look, you don't know what you're doing. And if, like I say, if you don't know, you better ask somebody.
What you say, Hasan?
I have never, ever, and you could ask my wife, walked in anywhere and said, I'm the man, I have the phone. Ever. I don't think that way. There have been times that I have said, you know, if I'm leading this family, right? If I'm leading this family, but that's not because I'm a man. It's because of the roles that we're playing in a particular situation. And so there are things that my wife tells me. And again, I guess I got married. I don't know if as late or whatever. I don't know when you got married, but I would consider I got married late in my life too, which I think was a blessing because it allowed me to be mature enough to be the man that she needed. You know what I mean? And I'm constantly like, we'll have conversations and I'll ask her, like, what can I do to be a better man? Like, I ask her that. The same question I asked you, I'll ask her, is there anything that I can do to be, you know, and you know, she'll either say, you know, at the time she'll say no, or I need you to do this, you know? And I think that ongoing conversation is really valid and really important. I think that men and women, or let's just talk about in heterosexual, you know, marriages, relationships.
Right.
I think that men and women have to take leadership roles at different times. There are things that my wife does that are better than I do. She does them better than I do. And so I would be a fool. They say only a fool argues with the truth. I would be a fool not to follow her lead, right? I think about the family unit as a team. Right. So if we look at football, there can only be one quarterback at a time. If we're talking about finances, I might be the quarterback. Right. If we're talking about the home, she's going to be the quarterback, you know, and not because of pre-subscribed roles of male and female. It's just that there's some things that she's better at. Me, I'll do 14-hour days and I won't bat an eye and I'll be all right. And just I hustle. I've been a hustler since the time that I was growing up in the projects, and that's what I'm good at. But there's other stuff that she's good at.
But I think the question that you even asked is growth, right? When you're asking your partner how you can be better, I think even asking that question is a sign of growth. Let me ask you this, because earlier you all alluded to the pressures of society and having to prove yourself through external pressures. And I say prove yourself or feeling like you have to, right? Even if you are okay with who you are in your own skin. Do those pressures and cultural norms for Black men contribute to domestic violence? And if so, how do we confront those issues?
I think they can, depending on the individual. And I don't put that out there as an excuse for any type of behavior in that regard. But yeah, I mean, there are days when I, you know, come into the house and it's been one of those days, you know, where I've had to work a little bit harder. I've had to, you know, maybe deal with some circumstances or situations that brought about some tension or some stress. And so by the time I get home, I might be in a mindset where I just need to wind down. I just want to relax, okay? But I need to recognize that my wife didn't have that day, you know, or she had her own day, and she may need something from me at that time that I'm just not able to give. Okay, I need to learn how to be able to say, I want to be here for you right now, but can you give me a few minutes? And, you know, and let me say this: I need to get better at that communication.
Right.
Because oftentimes I'll either shut down or I'm not a screaming type of burst, but I have a way of expressing my frustration that pushes people away, you know? And so and like I said, in answer to the question, I could see where that could be a contributor to that type of behavior with regards to domestic violence, stuff like that, but it's not an excuse.
Yeah, and we should say domestic violence is verbal, it's psychological, it's emotional, it's physical, and it's sexual. So it's all of the above. Go ahead, Hasan.
Does it contribute? 100%. I have to constantly try to, like we talk about growth from the time we were young. I have been abusive. You know what I mean? I have said things, I have snapped, I have, you know, and I'm glad that you said that, right? Domestic violence is, because I was going to actually, prior to you saying that, I was going to ask, I said, do you mean of domestic abuse? Or, you know, in general, all of it, because people forget.
It's a pattern,
right?
A pattern of abuse.
People forget to think about the fact that you could say something that's abusive. You can leverage power that is in an abusive way. You leverage finances. You can do so many different things as a man to be abusive. And I think also women can be abusive as well, and vice versa. So it is important to have that conversation about communication. When Vince is talking about, you have to constantly try to improve communication. If you think that two people are going to get married and have 100% A+ communication from the very beginning, you're lying to yourself. That is not what marriage is. That's not the reality of marriage, right? When something happens and there's a blow up and there's a flare and you're talking and clash, you have to talk after that. What went wrong? We don't ever want to do that again. We don't want to say those things again. How can we be better the next time? And so my wife and I constantly have that conversation. It's like, hey, can we do better? Can we try this? Well, what do you think I could have done? Well, what do you think you could have done? And if you don't have those conversations, I think you're going to end up with that abuse.
But you're in a space and a place now where you can have that conversation.
100%.
So what do you do? Is there a moment then where your understanding of manhood was challenged, and what did it teach you?
When
your manhood was challenged, was there a moment in which you felt your understanding of manhood was challenged? And if so, what did this teach you? Same question too, Vince.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yes.
I mean, yeah.
All right, what did it teach you?
Go.
Well, and again, when you've grown up and you're conditioned about manhood in certain ways, and even though I've been through all these 12-man model groups and realized and looked in the mirror at myself, there's still some things ingrained in me that will push a button, and
what are those things, Vince?
Well, one of those things is the way that I'm talked to sometimes. Okay. Because I mean, sometimes I'm trying to be nice because this is being a video, but when I'm talked to in a way that makes me feel like I'm a child, that's, there's a defense that goes up.
Okay. That challenges your manhood.
Yeah. That's one of those wait a minute, hold up moments.
Like, and it could be innocent, it could be benign, but it's a trigger for you.
It's a trigger for me.
Yeah. You're laughing. Why are you laughing?
Well, there's a I can't remember who the person was. There's a famous quote. It says, who do you think you're talking to like that?
Right.
That comes up often. It's like,
is that when you feel like your man has been challenged?
The one thing, if you want to trigger me, is yell at me, disrespect me. To
me,
that is a level of disrespect. And I'm not sure if it necessarily has to do with manhood or just a matter of respect.
So what is
Don't yell at me.
So what have you learned from that? There's two things we got it. We're at time, but I have to ask you two things. What did these, so you're triggered, what does it teach you about how you react? And then I want you to give us some advice and resources to help other Black men.
Well, what it teaches me is not to react, but to respond if necessary. Because the other thing I wanted to say about that too, and it doesn't matter if that comes from a woman or a man, it's still a challenge.
You don't like condescension.
The way that somebody speaks to me. So it teaches me to respond, and I've learned to pause within myself and determine whether or not, okay, do you need to respond to this or should you not respond to this? Look, and sometimes not responding is best, because no matter how I look at it, if I think I'm going to respond and it's going to be negative.
That's very hard though.
Yeah. Willie Jolly, who is a good friend of mine, motivational speaker, has a book out, Make Love, Make It Last, Make Money, Make Love, Make It Last, something like that. But he says that he and his wife have negotiated the minefields in their relationship. So we don't do this, and we don't do this, and we good, like together, because just like you said, those triggers in a relationship can cause harm, and they have an agreement about, you don't do that, you don't do this, and we good.
But it doesn't always stop those minefields from happening.
No.
Right. So because like we've negotiated, right? You negotiate, but in the moment, what I was going to respond and say is empathy. What it has taught me to do is to empathize. To anytime my wife or a person or a woman, whatever, it doesn't matter who, is aggressive, that is usually a survival tactic. Deep down inside, you're hurt, right? And so I have to try to shift my mindset to think, why is she yelling? Why is she? It really is that she's hurt. She's vulnerable. But we don't, as humans, survival tactics, we don't show the vulnerable side.
Right.
We fight back. You know what I mean? And so if we can take a minute, the first thing is what Vince said, breathe, take a breath and pause. And then you have to empathize. Why is this happening? And then it helps you respond differently.
So we are out of time, but I do have to get resources. What suggestions, advice, and resources would you give other Black men, especially because DV is, Black women are certainly one of the least protected in our country around these issues?
I would just say be informed. 12-man model.
12-man model.
Take a part of that and read up as much as you possibly can. Listen to podcasts on relationships, but make sure it's the right one, not Kevin Samuels. Somebody else.
Okay.
Yes. I agree. Be open-minded, have conversations around other positive men, and be willing to put the mirror in front of yourself. Take a look at yourself.
All right. That's Vincent Love, Media Past President of the 100 Black Men, and Hasan Stephens, the CEO of the Good Life Foundation. If you want to be in conversation with other brothers like this, a 12-man model, you can contact verahouse.org or 315-425-0818 and get the support and information you need. It's very simple. You get a group of guys together, we have a leadership conversation, and we change lives and we change communities. I want to thank the Community Folk Arts Center once again for their support of these efforts and allowing us the space to have this conversation, Dr. Tanisha Jackson as well. And shout out to the Color of Change Committee at Vera House with Dr. Imad Rahim and Marissa Saunders as honorary co-chairs of the White Women Campaign 2021. Without them, none of this would have been possible. But more importantly, we can make a difference in our community, one conversation at a time. We are in this work together. None of us are perfect in this work. One of the things we tell those who contribute and participate in the 12-man model, they don't get a letter of completion, they get a letter of attendance because the work continues every day. Yeah. Just because I get to be a facilitator and they've been through it, we still gotta be in relationship with people and we still have to do the work. But if we do that work, we can realize the vision that we have of a world free of violence and abuse, but we can also reduce violence in our community. We can do it, and with these brothers and with you, we can make that happen. I'm George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation.